Welcome to the lands of science fiction stories. I wish you a pleasant listening experience.
The dimly lit corridor of the Karnak battlecruiser vibrated with a low hum of energy. Aboard the ship, a platoon of alien marines, armed to the teeth with plasma rifles and kinetic shields, nervously awaited their orders. At the center of the group stood Captain Zevik, a towering figure with glistening scales and multiple tentacle-like appendages. His compound eyes flickered with nervous anticipation. But the source of his unease wasn't the mission. It was the new recruit, a human. Zevik glanced sideways at the human soldier standing at ease next to him, her arms folded across her chest. Private Jess Martinez didn't appear fazed by the upcoming battle or the fact she was the only human aboard the alien warship. She was a soldier from Earth, a planet the Galactic Alliance had recently classified as a Deathworld, due to its harsh conditions and the seemingly indestructible nature of its inhabitants. "Are you prepared?" Zevik asked, his mandibles clicking as he struggled with the Terran language. Jess chuckled, brushing a lock of dark hair out of her face. "Prepared? Buddy, I was born ready. I didn't get sent here to play it safe." The rest of the squad exchanged uneasy glances. They had heard the rumors about Deathworlders, humans, who seemed to laugh in the face of danger, take blows that would kill most species, and worse yet, made light of the most serious situations. Jess, it seemed, was no exception. Zevik cleared his throat. "We'll be entering hostile territory soon. The Grundar, our enemies, are relentless. Do you comprehend the danger?" Jess snorted, adjusting the strap of her plasma rifle. "Danger? Oh, Captain, I love a good challenge. Besides, I've been through worse." Her voice was laced with a nonchalant attitude that only added to the Marine's confusion. One of the alien soldiers, shifted uncomfortably in his armor. His antennae twitched, and his large, dark eyes blinked nervously. "The Grundar are not to be underestimated," Hak warned. "Their strength is nothing compared to my stubbornness," Jess cut in with a grin. She gave Virtak a friendly pat on the back. "Don't worry, I've got your six." The ship rocked violently as it entered the battle zone, and alarms blared through the halls. Zevik barked orders, and the platoon scrambled into position. Jess, unfazed by the sudden commotion, simply adjusted her grip on her rifle and followed suit. As they descended into the heart of the Grundar's territory, the tension among the alien soldiers grew. They moved cautiously through the halls, their weapons drawn, eyes darting in every direction. But Jess, ever the outlier, strolled forward with an almost casual air. A sudden explosion rocked the ground beneath them, sending several of the soldiers sprawling. Jess, however, remained standing, a slight smirk on her lips as she scanned the area for the source of the blast. "You all right there, Captain?" she called over the din of chaos. Zevik struggled to his feet, staring at her incredulously. How are you so calm?" "Calm? I'm just excited," she replied with a wink. Before Zevik could respond, a squad of Grundar soldiers rounded the corner, their menacing forms looming over the alien marines. Their eyes glinted with malice as they prepared to strike. "Here we go," Jess muttered, raising her plasma rifle and taking aim. The ensuing firefight was brutal. Plasma bolts flew through the air, the smell of scorched metal and flesh thickening the atmosphere. But even as the situation escalated, Jess never lost her cool. Her movements were precise, her focus unwavering. But then, a plasma bolt struck her, directly in the arm. The force of the blast sent her spinning, her left arm severed at the shoulder, blood splattering across the floor. Zevik and the other soldiers froze in shock, their eyes wide as they witnessed the gruesome injury. Jess, however, didn't scream. She didn't even flinch. Instead, she glanced down at her stump, then at the gaping mouths of her comrades and said, "Well, there goes my favorite shirt." Zevik's tentacles twitched in disbelief. "Private Martinez, you've lost your arm." Jess shrugged, or at least tried to, with her remaining shoulder. It's just a scratch. I've got another arm. Let's not get too dramatic." The Grundar soldiers, momentarily distracted by the sight of this bizarre human, hesitated. Jess used the opportunity to switch her plasma rifle to her remaining hand, expertly firing off several shots. 3 Grundar dropped instantly. What are you doing? Vihak stammered, still in shock. Jess wiped some blood from her brow, grinning through the pain. What does it look like? Finishing the mission. Now quit gawking and let's take these guys out. Zevik could hardly process what he was witnessing. A human, a fragile, squishy-looking creature, had just lost an arm and was still cracking jokes, still fighting. This wasn't just resilience, it was insanity. But it worked. As the final Grundar fell, Jess glanced at the stump where her arm used to be. You know, I was thinking about cutting back on weight anyway. Guess this is one way to do it. The alien Marines stared at her, unsure of how to react. Jess, meanwhile, casually tied a strip of cloth around her injury, stemming the bleeding. You're injured, Zevik said, still dumbfounded. Jess gave him a wink. Yeah, but that's not stopping me. Let's move, Captain. We've got a job to finish. As the team pressed on, one thing was clear. This human, this Deathworlder, was a force of nature unlike anything they had ever encountered. And the universe, the group of alien Marines had only begun to witness the extent of their madness, their confidence shaken by what they just witnessed. Private Jess Martinez, one arm down, walked ahead of them with a grin still plastered on her face, as if nothing had happened. Zevik couldn't fathom it. She had lost a limb, yet here she was, cracking jokes and pressing forward without a care in the world. How can you? Zevik trailed off, trying to find the words. His compound eyes swiveled to the human, who remained completely unbothered by the events of the last few minutes. How can you be so unaffected? Jess chuckled as she reloaded her plasma rifle with her remaining arm, her steps unhurried as though they weren't marching toward more enemies. Simple, Captain. You Deathworlders learn quick. In the face of adversity, laugh harder. Keeps you sane. Or maybe drives you crazier. Either way it works. Viatek still couldn't believe his compound eyes. He kept glancing at the stump where her arm used to be, his antennae twitching with unease. That should have incapacitated you. How can you even continue functioning? Jess rolled her eyes. Oh, you guys don't know the half of it. Human endurance, my friend. We've dealt with worse things on Earth than plasma burns. Besides, she added with a smirk, I've got a backup arm waiting for me back home. Not worried. Before Zevik could respond, the team's path narrowed as they reached a large set of reinforced doors. They knew from their briefings that these doors led to the Grundar command center. Jess stopped and studied them. Right, so we breach these bad boys, take down their commander, and get the hell out. Easy peasy. Zevik's mandibles clicked nervously. It's not going to be that simple. The Grundar are heavily fortified. And what? Jess grinned, cutting him off. They're ugly? Come on, Captain, this is just a regular Tuesday for me. The alien Marines couldn't comprehend the sheer audacity of this human. Even in the face of an overwhelming threat, she remained unervingly calm, too calm. It wasn't just the missing arm or the battlefield, it was her entire demeanor. They had never encountered anything like her, not even in the worst corners of the galaxy. Zevik, on my mark, we blow these doors, Jess commanded, now fully taking the lead. The captain blinked at her. He wasn't used to taking orders from someone else, let alone a human, but something about Jess' presence demanded attention. The explosives were planted, and the team took cover. Jess stood at the front, staring at the door, rifle raised, as if she didn't care that the blast would happen mere feet from her. The countdown began. Zevik shifted uncomfortably, watching her. Vertek's antennae twitched as his mandibles chattered in anticipation. Jess adjusted her stance, that same unflinching smile on her lips. Zevik's appendages tensed, ready for the imminent breach. The doors exploded inward with a deafening roar, sending debris flying through the corridor. Jess wasted no time. Before the dust could settle, she charged in, plasma rifle already firing. The alien Marines were left dumbstruck for a moment before they followed her lead. Inside, the Grundar forces were ready, but Jess moved with deadly precision, taking out 2 soldiers before the others could even react. Plasma bolts whizzed past her, but she didn't flinch, her one remaining arm proving more than capable of handling the rifle with pinpoint accuracy. Zevik and the rest of the Marines joined the fray, but it was clear that Jess was a force of nature. Her movements were sharp, calculated and efficient. She moved as though losing a limb had only made her stronger. But what was truly unnerving was the look on her face, that grin. She was enjoying this. "Come on, fellas," she yelled over the sound of plasma fire, her voice dripping with excitement. "Let's give these bastards something to remember us by." The Grundar, relentless as ever, pushed back hard, but they were no match for Jess's combat expertise. She was laughing now, a wild, manic sound that echoed through the chamber. Plasma bolts scorched the walls around her, but she didn't slow down, didn't hesitate. Zevik, fighting beside her, couldn't believe what he was seeing. His mind raced as he tried to keep up, his appendages firing in every direction. But it wasn't just Jess's combat prowess that unsettled him, it was the way she reveled in the chaos. Every shot, every close call only seemed to fuel her. This wasn't just resilience, it was madness. In the midst of the battle, Jess suddenly threw herself against the nearest Grundar soldier, using her stump as a blunt weapon. She slammed it into the alien's face with a sickening thud, knocking it to the ground. Zevik and the others watched in stunned silence as Jess stood over her fallen enemy, grinning like a predator who had just cornered its prey. "Looks like I just disarmed you," she quipped, wiping some blood off her cheek. Veth blinked, his mandibles trembling. That was the worst pun I have ever heard." Jess cackled, stepping over the body. "Stick with me and you'll hear plenty more." As the battle raged on, the Grundar forces began to falter. Their fearsome reputation meant little in the face of this human who treated the battlefield like her own personal playground. With every enemy that fell, Jess grew more reckless, more daring. She took risks no sane soldier would ever take, charging headfirst into danger with nothing but a grin and a terrible joke on her lips. By the time the last of the Grundar had fallen, the alien Marines were left in a daze, staring at the carnage around them. Jess, panting and bloodied, still stood tall, her rifle slung over her shoulder. "Well," she said, wiping sweat from her brow, "that was fun." Zevik stared at her, unsure of what to say. You're a lunatic." Jess just winked. "Maybe, but I get the job done." As they regrouped and prepared to leave the Grundar command center, Zevik couldn't help but feel a growing sense of unease. Humans were far more dangerous than he had ever imagined. And Private Jessica Martinez? She was something else entirely. One thing was certain, Deathworlders were not to be underestimated. Not by any species. Not ever. As the smoke cleared from the Grundar command center, the alien Marines regrouped, their eyes shifting warily between the carnage left behind and the one-armed human still grinning like she had won a lottery. Jess stood tall, her one good arm resting on her plasma rifle, her uniform torn and bloodied. Despite everything, that unshakable grin never left her face. Zevik approached her cautiously, his compound eyes blinking as he struggled to comprehend what had just transpired. "Martinez, are you sure you're all right? That was intense." Jess looked at him and shrugged with her remaining shoulder. "What, that little skirmish? Come on, Captain, I've had worse days." She tapped the stump of her missing arm, now wrapped in a makeshift bandage. "Besides, it's not like I can lose the other one." The other Marines were still trying to process what they had witnessed. The battle had been brutal, but Jess's laughter and reckless attitude had unnerved even the most hardened among them. Vik, his antennae still twitching with uncertainty, ventured a hesitant question. "How can you be so unaffected by everything? You've lost a limb and fought like it was nothing." Jess chuckled as she holstered her rifle, her eyes gleaming with a strange intensity. "Let me tell you something, V. Humans are tough, yeah, but it's not just our bodies. It's our minds. We've been through hell for centuries on our little death world. So when the universe throws some big, scaly bad guys our way, well, we laugh. Because if you don't laugh, what else is there? Fear? Fears for species that don't know how to have fun." Zevik's mandibles clicked together, his unease growing. "Fun? This is a battlefield, Martinez. We could have been killed. And yet here we are," Jess said with a smirk, still standing, still breathing and ready for more. But the moment of quiet didn't last long. The ship suddenly rocked with another violent explosion, throwing everyone off balance. Zevik reached for his comm device as alarms blared throughout the Grundar command center. Report. Zevik barked, his voice tense. What's going on? A static-filled voice responded from the ship's bridge. Captain, the Grundar reinforcements have arrived. They're swarming us. We're outnumbered 10-1. We need to evacuate. Zevik's appendages quivered with dread. Understood. We're heading back now. The Marines began to move quickly, gathering their gear and preparing for a hasty retreat. Jess, however, didn't seem fazed by the news. Instead, she looked at Zevik with that same cocky grin. 10-1, huh? Sounds like a good time. Zevik glared at her. Martinez, this isn't a joke. We need to leave or we'll be overwhelmed. Jess shrugged. You go ahead and retreat. I'll keep them busy. What? Virtak exclaimed, his mandibles snapping in disbelief. You can't stay here alone. That's suicide. Jess turned toward him, her eyes gleaming with determination. You don't get it, guy. I'm not planning to die here. I'm planning to buy you guys enough time to get out. Someone's got to hold them off, and I'm not exactly in the mood for running. Zevik stepped forward, his tentacles curling in frustration. This is madness, Private. Even for you. Maybe, Jess admitted, hefting her plasma rifle with her one arm, but I've got nothing to lose. Besides, if I don't do this, who will? You guys? No offense, but you're not exactly cut out for last stands. Before Zevik could argue further, another explosion rocked the ship, and the distant sound of approaching Grundar soldiers filled the air. They were closing in. Go! Jess barked, her tone suddenly commanding. I'll cover your retreat. Get to the evac point and get out of here. For a moment, Zevik hesitated, torn between his duty as a captain and the insane plan this human had just put forward. But there was no time for debate. The Grundar were closing in fast, and they couldn't afford to stay any longer. May the stars guide you, Martinez, Zevik said grimly, before turning to lead the Marines out of the command center. As the alien Marines fled toward their ship, Jess remained behind, alone in the corridor, her rifle at the ready. She could hear the heavy footfalls of the Grundar soldiers echoing closer, their guttural voices barking orders as they advanced. All right, you scaly bastards, Jess muttered under her breath. Let's see what you're made of. The first wave of Grundar soldiers stormed into the corridor, their eyes widening in surprise when they saw the lone human standing in their way. Jess grinned, raising her rifle and firing off a series of precise shots that took down the first few soldiers with ease. But there were more. Dozens more. The Grundar forces swarmed the corridor, their plasma weapons blazing as they closed in on Jess. But she didn't flinch. She stood her ground, her rifle spitting fire as she took down one enemy after another. Despite the overwhelming odds, Jess's confidence never wavered. She was laughing now, a wild, reckless sound that echoed through the ship. Come on, is that all you've got? She yelled, her voice full of defiance. I've had hangovers worse than this. But the Grundar were relentless, their numbers seemingly endless. Jess's rifle ran dry, and she tossed it aside, pulling a combat knife from her belt. With only one arm and a blade, she charged into the fray, slashing and stabbing with brutal efficiency. The Grundar, caught off guard by her ferocity, fell one after another, but it wasn't enough. They kept coming, and Jess could feel her strength waning. Her vision blurred, her breath coming in ragged gasps, but still, she fought on. Just as she was about to be overwhelmed, a deafening roar shook the ship. A barrage of explosions ripped through the Grundar forces, sending them scattering in every direction. Jess blinked through the smoke, trying to understand what had just happened. And then she saw it. The Karnak had returned. Zevik's ship, flanked by a squadron of fighters, had launched a surprise attack on the Grundar reinforcements, creating enough chaos for Jess to catch her breath. Over her comm, Zevik's voice crackled. Martinez, you're not dying here today. We're coming to get you. Jess couldn't help but smile, despite the exhaustion creeping over her. Took you long enough, Captain. Within minutes, a dropship swooped in, landing just behind Jess as the remaining Grundar forces retreated in disarray. The doors of the dropship opened, and Zevik himself stepped out, his eyes wide with disbelief as he took in the sight of Jess, covered in blood, standing amidst a sea of fallen enemies. You really are insane, Zevik muttered, helping her onto the ship. Jess chuckled weakly, leaning on him for support. You're welcome, by the way. As the dropship took off and the Karnak prepared to jump to safety, Jess leaned back in her seat, her energy finally spent. The battle was over, and despite everything, she was still alive. You humans, Zevik said softly, shaking his head. You never cease to amaze me. Jess closed her eyes, a satisfied grin still on her lips. Yeah, well, what can I say? We're full of surprises. And with that, the battle-scarred warrior finally allowed herself to rest, knowing that today, at least, she had done what humans do best: survive against all odds.